Do you know someone who got fired on their first day? What did they do? His last job, he was driving cars from where they were dropped off to where they were sold at auction. He was driving this really nice BMW sitting at a stop sign at the base of a hill. Semi-truck carrying logs loses its brakes and slams him at 50 plus mph. He then proceeds to T-bone another car while still getting pushed by the semi. Him T-boning the other guy knocked him out from in front of the semi and into another car which had seen what was happening and slid to a stop. The semi went over the hill and landed in the creek at the base. He got cut out of the car, then airlifted out, along with the driver of the semi and the passenger of the car he T-boned. And when he called his boss, after emergency surgery, the boss fired him. He sued the heck out of the company for wrongful termination and he's been living off the money for 3 years. I worked at a gas station a while back. Helped train this new guy. He was really nice. We all liked him. First solo shift he walks away with $150 out of the register. Didn't even try to cover it up or anything. Everybody was shocked. WTF did he think was gonna happen? Worked at a 50s themed restaurant. Kid's name's Joe, gets a job as a buser boy. Was told to clean tables and set them. Nothing more. Nothing less. First table he cleans, he steals the tip. Server, foolishly, gives him the benefit of the doubt. Joe's next act of defiance. He approaches a friendly and elderly regular. They get to chatting and the gentleman brings up that he has just had serious dental surgery. Joe is intrigued and begins failed negotiations with the gentleman for painkillers. The negotiations turned to pleading and my manager intervened and promptly fired him. This all happened within the first hour. I fired a guy who showed up 4 hours late his first day. I was in a moving company at the time. When he showed up he asked if he still gets paid for the job. Since the bill includes 4 people and we did the job with 3, I told him to walk home and not to bother showing up the next day. Friend moved halfway across the state for a job. First day the company announced layoffs. She was let go. Seems like a common theme in this thread, which is really sad. Depends on the state. If it was Rhode Island she only had to move a few blocks. I work in a college town and we hired a new part-timer to work reception. On her first day she casually mentions to us that her wealthy parents want her to experience what it's like to struggle. So she has to work a job and use the city buses for 2 months and then she can quit and her parents will give her allowance back and get her a new car. Boss, wait, so you're going to leave in 2 months? Yeah, that's what my parents said. Boss, can I talk to you in my office? This happens where I work all the time. People just getting summer jobs at a place that is looking for long-term workers. My manager is never really happy when she finds out that they can't work once school starts. Not personally, but one of my favorite Reddit stories is of the teenage kid who got fired on his first day of working at the supermarket for eating all the skin off the rotisserie chickens. I'm gonna need that link. I worked with a guy named Daryl for about 7 hours. Daryl was probably in his late 40s early 50s and was a pretty intimidating looking guy. He was probably 6 feet 6 inches, 250 lbs plus, muscular, bald, and a full beard. He was hired as a produce manager at the grocery store I worked at. I talked to him for a while and he seemed to be an extremely nice guy. He said he was in the military most of his life, went to college when he was in his 40s, and ended up getting a master's in industrial engineering. He was telling me how depressed he was that no one would hire him because of his age, and was planning on working here while job hunting. We were almost off work, and the assistant manager came to talk to us. I forgot to mention that the assistant manager was an enormous butthole. He came over, introduced himself to Daryl, and immediately began criticizing his first day's work. I don't know exactly what Daryl did, but he made a minor mistake that made the assistant manager ask him, "Do you even know what a serrano pepper is?" Daryl defended himself and apologized, saying he would fix whatever mistake he made. The assistant manager then delivered the final blow and said, "Noah, it looks like we've hired a produce manager who doesn't know crap about produce," and laughed. Daryl then said what every employee there had wanted to say at one point: "You're not going to talk to me like a freaking child." The assistant manager fired him on the spot. I like Daryl. Hope he found a good job. I was a pizza delivery guy at a family-owned Italian restaurant. They brought a guy in to help make pizzas. 2 hours into his training he starts talking about wanting to bang the waitresses. The waitresses were the daughters of the owner. The guy teaching him how to make the pizzas was the older brother. He was physically ejected from the building. I'm noticing a lot of the stories on this thread are people who couldn't shut the frick up, lol. Got fired on my first week. After training when the schedule came out. I was in high school and during the interview I told the manager interviewing me that I could only work 20 hours a week. I didn't mind 8-hour days on weekends, but during the week I couldn't do it. As soon as training ends, the schedule comes out and I'm scheduled to work 39.5 hours with several 8-hour shifts on weekdays after school. I went into the manager's office and told him that I couldn't do it, and so he said, "This is why we hired you, either do it or you're fired." Well, that was that. While working on an apple orchard in Australia, the foreman would fire any German or Asian worker within their first hour simply for speaking. Wasn't the most pleasant person to work for. Yup, new kid around 19 or 20 comes in, warehouse job, goes out to buy weed during lunch break, gets busted. Turns out he has a warrant out for him, goes to jail, then has the balls to call us to bail him out because he lives with his grandmother and she would get upset. Come on, dude, I've worked there like for all my life. Guy applied for a general manager position at the movie theater I worked at. He got the job based off him having prior manager experience at Pizza Hut or something. First day he showed up high wearing a suns out guns out tank top and swimming trunk. Also, he was wearing 2 different shoes. Owner told him to leave promptly after showing up for work that same day. Also, he was wearing 2 different shoes. This is what seals it. I applied for a job in the kitchen of restaurant. There was no application, just a walk-in interview. I show up to work a couple days later and the chef starts giving me a tour of the kitchen. Alright, you ready to make some omelets up? Sure. You gonna show me? He looked at me, paused, and started laughing. Nervous laughter from my side. As it turns out, the manager called the wrong person. She got me mixed up with the guy who had 5 years experience and called me by mistake. At orientation, they told the 12 of us that we were the bestest and the brightest of 900 or so interviews they'd conducted. We got our access badges and our corporate Amex cards. One of the best and the brightest went to a high-end men's clothing store on his lunch hour and purchased $4,000 worth of suits, ties and shoes. He came back from lunch and bragged of his exploits. Fired on the spot. He actually thought his Amex card was a job perk. Can I at least keep the clothes? One guy I hired, and it turned out he had been fired from his last job on the first day. I never found out why, but I didn't have him back because he was making other employees uncomfortable, would mutter hostile things, not answer direct questions and instead just stare silently. Pretty uncomfortable stuff. I'm guessing that did it. I had to fire a janitor on day 1 because someone spilled a cup of coffee and he stared them directly in the eyes and yelled "frick you" at the top of his lungs. He was freaking crazy. He threatened to kill me after he was fired and stood outside of the workplace with a bouquet of flowers until we called the police on more than one occasion. I had just arrived at Great Lakes for boot camp. This was in 1991. And we are standing in line for our first introduction to what is known in the military as Operation Golden Flow, or our first urinalysis test. As I'm standing in a very long line and tip-tapping around because I have to pee so much, a guy standing behind me taps me on the shoulder and asks what we are waiting for. I look at him and tell him a urinalysis. He looks at me and asks me what a urinalysis is, so I tell him to see who has taken any drugs recently. He nods, shrugs and says, "Well, I guess I shouldn't have smoked that crack last night." He was serious. Now, he officially wasn't fired that first day, but about 2 weeks later when his results came back he was. So yes, you can say that he was fired that first day but had to suffer for a few weeks until officially let go. I fired someone about 2 hours into the first day. We had a monster pile of branches to send through the wood chipper and 2 of my better guys were working on it. I hire a new guy to help out. I spend all this time training him how not to get killed by the wood chipper and send him out with my 2 guys. I run out a bit later to check on him and I see me experienced guys getting it done. They are busting their butts and putting in work chipping branches. New guy on the other hand picks up a twig and tosses it in the chipper, grabs a drink of water, grabs another twig, another drink, goes and has a smoke, another few twigs, etc. I had to let him go. I managed a smoothie place for a while and hired this kid for mornings. His first day he was 2 hours late. He apologized for being late because he was tripping on shrooms and got lost on the way to work. He also took 15 smoke breaks in the 4 hours that he worked. When his shift was over I told him not to come back. Friend was hired and then the next day the company announced layoffs. Of course he was first to go. He got lucky though because for one reason or another they had to continue paying him for the next 2 months even though he only worked a total of 2 days. Halfway into that 2 months he found a better job. I had that happen for a contracting gig. 3 days work, 2 weeks payout because the contract stated they had to give a minimum notice. I've let people go on the first day before. More often than not, it's blatant lies on their resume about work experience and qualifications. Mistakes are almost always forgiven. I wasn't there but someone who applied for my design job before me apparently just sat there, probably quietly panicking, for half the day and then left at lunchtime. Turns out they couldn't actually use any of the software they claimed they could and didn't do anything. Lots of design jobs give you a little software test first but not all of them. My company hired temps for this big job. We didn't have a lot of space, so temps had to double up in cubicles. I did feel very bad for them, but some of their actions were hilarious terrible. Our laptops require a password to log in before doing anything. It's a grey screen with prompts for the username and password. Pretty simple stuff. One guy had his username and password written on a post-it note. He then spent 2 hours trying to figure out how to log in. He didn't realize he had to press enter. 2 hours. Another guy was chugging along at his task. His cube mate was sneezing or talking or something. His reaction? Slap her. He got escorted out of the building. The next day, he shows up to work again like nothing happened. He was escorted back out and told to please not return. Most of the temps were nice and did just fine. Some made you wonder if they would ever get a full-time gig. Had a buddy get hired as a valet in downtown. On his first day he was asked to park a pretty expensive luxury car and ended up hitting it onto the concrete pillars in the parking garage. Pretty much got fired on the spot. This was my biggest fear when I started my valet job. I made it almost a year before I wrecked a car. Didn't get fired, though. First big job after college I worked for an MSP, IT consultants engineers. They hired a new guy and his first assignment out of the gate was one of our tougher clients to deal with. This guy was to go out and replace a switch, config and all. 4 hours later he still wasn't done. Come to find out he had no clue what he was doing. We hired him as desktop support and they were having him do network stuff. They called him in and fired him that day. I felt really bad for the guy. So many stories like that. People having to do stuff they weren't hired for. Either he didn't read the contract or he can defend himself easily. Second day, she was visiting one of our production sites and thought the second day was starting too early, so she called down to the local leadership team to say she'd be in that afternoon, if at all. She was on the next flight home instead. That's a rude move, even if you have some backup plans. Dude was fired not even an hour into his first day. I worked at a warehouse for about 3 months, and the company was moving to a new location, so we were taking all the boxes off the racks, putting them on pallets, wrapping the pallets, and loading them onto several different trucks. One of my bosses was sent over to help train the new guy, but the new guy didn't know he was working with a boss. Halfway through our first pallet, new guy dropped a box he was supposed to catch because he was too busy texting. He started bitching about how the box landed on his foot and he wasn't sure if he could keep lifting boxes now. So we sent him with a different group that was taping up the pallets. Once we finish our second pallet, the boss and I take it over to be tapped. The boss specifically requested that the new guy take care of it. Turns out new guy is missing. I'm now given the task of finding him. 10 minutes later I find a pile of clothes sitting on the ground in the back of the warehouse. I walk around it and absolutely could not believe what I was seeing. This guy took the clothes out of several boxes, broke the boxes down and laid them out on the floor, and I crap you not, this guy was freaking recording himself breakdancing. I'd like to imagine he was once an aspiring breakdancing master who had given up on his dreams. During the work shift he touches the cardboard and recognizes it Karagrid TF97, the Rolls Royce of cardboards. It rekindles his intense desire for breaking and he just can't resist. I worked at Future Shop when the store first opened in my city. Since it was brand new, the first few days were spent setting up the store itself before the grand opening. And when everyone arrived on the second day of work, they had everyone in the entire store stand in a circle while they explained that someone had stolen a copy of Grand Theft Auto. That they knew who it was since everything was recorded by the security cameras, and asked for the person who knows who they are to please leave the store immediately or else they would call the police. The youngest and quietest teenager immediately walked out with his head hanging low. Super awkward. It was actually mine and another guy's second day. He got fired for a dispute. He was left hours away from where we started. I voiced my concern for leaving this kid hundreds of miles from known civilization and was also fired. It was good times. Never got paid for the first day and a half either. I can't believe you didn't get paid. We fired a guy after 1 hour of orientation and had to pay him for it. When I worked student tech support while in school, my boss told the story of one of the only times she'd had to fire someone. Within just a couple of days of training ending, it came out he was installing some sort of remote desktop software on every computer he touched, meaning he could access all of them from his own PC. These were students' private computers, not lab machines, just to make it easier when they needed help again, but no one bought that. He was obviously immediately fired and faced disciplinary action with the school. I hope they paid for an advanced cleanup for these computers in case he had installed other software, like the one that spy on your webcam. I worked at a Monsanto corn warehouse a few years ago with my brother. One day a new guy comes in and was training on a forklift. After a couple hours he was on his own and after about 20 minutes of that he crashed his forklift into the wall. He shut the lift down, got up and walked out of an emergency exit door and drove away. 6 months later we had a new boss and he is training a new guy, which just so happens to be the exact same guy but he was going by a different name. He got fired a month later for 2 minor forklift accidents. He was hired on Friday at about 5 PM and his first shift was the following day, 7 AM Saturday. We are mechanics. We don't respect Monday Fridays sometimes. Well, he showed up to work at 6:50 AM Saturday morning completely S-faced. He was asked to not clock in, ever. I got fired after my first week because of charges on my record that never occurred. I had to go to the police and have another background check run, contact HR. I was then rehired. It was honestly a tough week getting all that straight, and now I wonder how many jobs I didn't get because of this mix-up. I have a really generic name and share part of a social security number with a person that has the same name as well. Apparently he likes to beat his wife up. I have a fairly generic first name and after 25 years of a long and hard to pronounce last name, married a guy with one of the most common last names in the US. We just purchased a house and apparently my name is the same as a lady who killed her kids, so I had to sign an affidavit that I wasn't her. Kid came to work his first day at a landscaping company I worked for. We went out on a job and afterward the boss told him to gas up the truck. He did exactly what they asked. Turns out it was our work truck that leaked oil like a sieve. Boss was too cheap to fix it. No one told him everyone puts in new oil when they fill it up. So when the engine seized up later on, guess who got fired for it? That's bulls. This is how you make people say how bad a company is. Worked for a logistics company that specialized in transport computers. The guy left the depot on his first day, made his first delivery, went to the petrol station to fill up, left the keys in the cab when he went to pay and returned to nothing more than an empty parking spot and bad work references. When I worked at a bank, the guy who repossessed cars got his car stolen, went in the convenience store for a hot dog, left his car running, his car got stolen, called someone from the bank to give him a ride back. My dad's friend was a car salesman for a little while at a Chevy dealer. Apparently, while he was working there, they hired a new guy, and they asked if he wanted to test drive any of the cars. So he says he wants to test drive one of the Corvettes. They say great, so one of the managers goes with him. The guy goes way too fast down a country road and crashes the thing into a tree. The manager was obviously upset, but the guy still wasn't actually fired. He just said, okay, we have to go back to the dealership and file an insurance claim. Also, you aren't allowed to drive the cars anymore. The guy apparently starts yelling about how he can't afford to pay for the car and just starts running down the road. They end up calling the cops, and not only does the guy get fired, but he also gets arrested. When I was in college, I got a job at one of those paint your own pottery places. They told me they'd train me on my first day. When I showed up, there was a birthday party underway with 15 8-year-olds. I didn't get any training and ended up fricking up a couple's kids' pottery items on accident. The rest of the staff were really friendly to me but seemed a bit culty. At the end of the shift, it was a pretty mutual thanks but no thanks situation. Yet the boss felt the need to call me the next day to tell me just how much the other workers didn't like me. It was strange and petty. Super bummed I don't work there anymore. Had a person ask to take the first official day of the job off. This was during group training. After everyone there was guaranteed a position. Didn't see them again. Super hot girl was hired at Dong Sporting Goods. She started at 10 AM and was fired at 2:30 PM along with a guy for banging in the stock room. They both left with smiles on their faces. TL. DR. Woman took store name too literally. My roommate went to school to be a nurse. The night before, her classmate got hired at their internship. That night, she comes home and tells me they fired her classmate to hire her instead. Never got all of the details, but they did the entire process right then and there. Awkward. The recruiter must have fricked up. That's a hard enough field without having to deal with stuff like that. I worked for a country club when I was 18. 15-year-old was hired to work weekends as a busboy. Wasn't allowed to drive a golf cart because he didn't have a license. Convinced manager that it's ridiculous that you need a license to drive a golf cart. Ends up flying down a hill. Bails and the cart hits a tree faster than you've ever seen a golf cart move. Fired. I used to work at McDonald's. It takes quite a bit to get fired on your first day, yet I've seen it happen a few times. One time a new hire got a customer's drive-through meal prepped, only to start eating it before handing it to them. Another time one of the new hires said that he couldn't work there, so our manager said, well, give me a reason to fire you then. So he proceeded to take off his shirt and began to sing the wonderful ode to man titties. Milkshake. Boom. Promotion. 16-year-old kid was fired during his first day of training because he came in wearing a shirt that just said B across the front in giant letters. I mean, I know we have a causal dress code, but, well, you know what they say. Dress for the job you're looking for. Witnessed it myself. We hired a new welder who was supposedly well qualified, and me being the other new guy who didn't know crap, I was his assistant for the day. That afternoon he was asked to cut some steel up with an acetylene torch. Pretty easy job for a steel worker. Where did he do this? On the brand new expensive floor that they had just installed in the building we were working on. I told him, hey, shouldn't we be doing this elsewhere? Shut up, he says. Okay then. The sparks and bits of molten steel caused a couple of thousand in damage. My boss spent a good 15 minutes ranting and raving to the guy about how utterly incompetent he must be. Finally the guy meekly asks if he's fired. He was fired. I was taught how to use an acetylene torch not long after, and told to do it outside of the building too. I was hired by IBM in August 1999. On my first day, I was chatting with my new manager. I casually mentioned I was a single father of 2 young children, among other things. 2 hours later, I was let go. She was concerned that I would not be able to meet the schedule. Had she asked, I would have reassured her. I asked her to reconsider and told her I'd be in touch. She said her decision was made and I shouldn't bother. I let her have 2 weeks to think it over before I called and asked how she would like her name spelled in the discrimination report I was submitting to the Ministry of Employment. She asked, for what? I answered marital and family status. She spelled her name. I said goodbye. I checked the time. My phone rang 48 minutes later. It was a senior department head with a job offer, not an interview. A position waiting for me with assurances that they are a diverse department representing all ethnicities, abilities, yada yada. I worked there off and on until 2009 and the massive layoffs hit. An ex-co-worker found a job working with a high-end car dealership. Think it was BMW. First day a customer comes in to get tire refills, so they get him to drive the car around back to get the tires done. New guy doesn't know how a standard works. Drives this car through the front wall of the dealership. All glass wall. Heck of a freaking screw up. The last software company I worked at would try to hire cheap labor coming out of India and Pakistan. The guys apparently had CS degrees, were fluent in the major programming languages, had years of experience etc. When they showed up it was obvious that getting a degree over there often just means learning English and telling them what degrees you want printed out. These guys had no idea how to use Windows, what a database was, etc. I've seen them print out code, then go to the bathroom and talk on the phone to someone back home for an hour. It was actually pretty sad. They'd be fired after a few hours and usually left the office crying. I got the impression these guys had been scammed back home. The universities would take huge amounts of money from their families, focus solely on making them look good on paper, then fly them off to the West knowing full well they're unemployable. That sounds like bad business practice on the part of the software company to me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.